Hello and how you doing, and welcome back to Two Jagoffs. I am your host, Austin Carnes. And ladies and gentlemen, here on the podcast today, we are bringing on another very special guest. He is the Director of Broadcast and Video Production here at the University of Pitt. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Jason Earle. Jason, how's it going today, my friend?
Austin, good. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm looking forward to chatting with you and appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your very busy day to come here on Two Jagoffs. And thank you so much for being flexible with your schedule. I got sick earlier in the week. I was able to move stuff around. So thank you so much for giving me some of your time and moving all that around. I truly appreciate it.
So excited to be on and glad we could figure it out.
Absolutely. I also got a little lost on the way here. Now I see why they call it cardiac kill. I'm not going to lie. I see why they call it cardiac kill. I had to carry this big box around, and oh my goodness, I was out of breath. But
Oakland is a complicated neighborhood, but after you spend a lot of time here, you just say it has character, right? It's good. You learn to love it.
I learned to love it. So I want to kind of get to know you a little bit and have the fans of Two Jagoffs get to know you. So you went to North Allegheny High School, not that far from Carlington, actually, which is where I went. You were a 2020 graduate here at Pitt, getting a bachelor's degree in communication, English writing, and now you pretty much do everything under the sun here at Pitt. I mean, you've called soccer, basketball, volleyball. I think I've even seen you on the sideline a couple times for football at some of the Pitt games. Talk to me a little bit about your career. What exactly do you do specifically? And I guess what's exactly the functions? Like, what's a day in the life of Jason Earle?
Well, you pretty much summed it up. It's a job where you do tend to wear many different hats, and my job involves everything from producing national television on ACC Network and sometimes ESPN or ESPN2, and it can also involve staffing student workers to work a baseball or softball game in the spring on a rainy day in Pittsburgh. So we say that oftentimes here is that we have a lot of highs and a lot of lows in our job just because of the nature of it. We are, me and the rest of my really talented staff, we oversee the entire broadcast department at Pitt. So everything that hits ACC Network or ACC Network Extra for a majority of Pitt sports comes from us. And so every day is different, which I love. I just got done explaining to you before we started taping here how in the fall it's volleyball and soccer. You get into the winter, it's basketball, wrestling, gymnastics. Spring involves baseball, softball, and lacrosse. So, and like you said, football in the fall as well. Doing that for the first time this past fall, being on the sidelines was really cool, being down at Acrisure Stadium there. So it is a lot of different things, but I really, really enjoy all of them. And I think one of the biggest things I've learned is when I was in school, I wanted to be a play-by-play announcer, on-air host, whatever it was. But I had some great mentors in the past, Kevin Wheeler, Bitsy Brandis here at Pitt, that kind of showed me the value of working behind the scenes as well. And so I got into producing and doing graphics and stuff for the ESPN and ACCN broadcast, and I was like, wow, this is really, really cool too. To the point where now, yes, I still love announcing, but also getting to be behind the scenes as well and in the control room. As an example, just last week we had Pitt and Georgia Tech played here on ACC Network. I was the producer for the broadcast and got to work directly with Doug Sherman and Eric Devendorf, who were the talent for the game. And of course, if you're from Pittsburgh or if you watched Big East basketball 10, 15 years ago, you know the name Eric Devendorf. Yep. So that was really cool for me just because he was a guy that I admittedly did not like growing up as a Pitt fan, but someone who had been such a big part of my childhood. And watching a guy like Aaron Devendorf play at Madison Square Garden for Syracuse and all the times he went up against Pitt and they had great battles. So those are the moments where it makes it really fulfilling and gratifying to be in the producer position and do that as well.
Absolutely. Now, from that producer position, I can only imagine every sport is a little different to produce. Every sport's a little different based on, I guess, the rules, the timing, and everything. Is there a preferred sport out of all the sports here at Pitt that you like to produce? Or do you kind of just, it doesn't really matter which one, just being in the control room itself is all that matters?
You're right. They are all very different. Different cadence, different speeds to each of them. And the fall's a very interesting time because you have volleyball, which is probably our fastest sport. If you've ever watched volleyball, obviously Pitt's got an excellent program. Yeah. It's very fast, and a lot of the points look exactly the same. So you can get kind of crossed up trying to figure out your instant replays and who had the ball where and at what point of the play you want to replay it. It's very, very difficult. But at the same time, the next day after a volleyball game, you might be doing a soccer game. Soccer tends to be very different in that it's very slow, methodical. Obviously, you have some great moments as well. I played soccer back at NA, and that's one of my favorites as well. But it's interesting having the contrast of those two at the same time. My favorite has to be basketball. Growing up during the golden era, if you will, of Pitt basketball, it's by far my favorite team that I've ever watched. I always ask people the question, if you could have one of your teams that you support win a national championship or a Super Bowl or a World Series, whatever it would be, who would it be? For me, it's always been Pitt basketball. I want to see them win conference titles, go to a Final Four, win the national championship, and I'm hopeful that one day that happens. But to answer your question, because of all of that, getting to cover Pitt basketball as an announcer and a producer has definitely been my favorite.
Absolutely. Now, all those years of you covering Pitt basketball and being involved behind the scenes and, I guess, right on the floor, is there a moment or a specific game or, I guess, scenario that stood out to you the most when calling or when being a part of a Pitt basketball broadcast?
Oh, there's so many, Austin. That's a tough question, but as soon as you ask me, three of them actually instantly come to mind. And so I'll start with 2023. Actually, there's one from each of the past three seasons.
Okay.
We'll start back in February of 2023, last home game of the year. A lot of people will remember this one where Aiden Fish made a basket against Syracuse at the very end of the game.
Yeah.
So he is from the area, played at Franklin Regional, did time as a manager, then a walk-on, and then ended up playing a role in that game for Pitt against Syracuse and scoring at the end on senior day. And at that point, you pretty much knew Pitt was going to the tournament. And everyone in the arena is losing their mind. It was just a moment where it felt like the zoo was back, the Pete was bumping again, and everybody was pumped out of their mind. And so to be in the producer chair for that one was something I'll never forget. And the two others, I was on the call for Bub Carrington's triple-double in his first collegiate game. And that was an experience and an opportunity that I'll never forget, just because I was explaining to you a little bit before we taped as well, just the nature of my position. I get to announce a lot of the early season games against the non-conference opponents, and then I produce the ones later in the season. So nothing against the North Carolina A&Ts of the world, but oftentimes those early season non-con games that I announce are a bit lopsided. And so there aren't usually any big moments or exciting games that happen in there. And so the fact that I got to be on the mic for Bub Carrington, who ended up being a lottery pick, getting a triple-double in his first game in a Pitt uniform, was another one of those moments I'll never forget. And the most recent one was I was on the call for Pitt, West Virginia. This current season, they played back in November, and Pitt just destroyed them from the start. And it was interesting because attending shoot-around that day, West Virginia had a new coach, Darren DeVries. He's in his first year, and he's doing a great job. But we were really impressed. I was on the call with Nick Rivers, who played at Pitt about 10, 15 years ago, and we were really impressed with them. And we thought it was going to be a really, really tight game, but Pitt just dismantled them from the start. And once again, it was another one of those moments where the Pete was just electric. The crowd was incredible. Backyard brawl rivalry game.
Yeah.
So that will be the third. Sorry to give you three, but
no, that's
they're
perfect.
all good.
The third one was great because that was the day that I was here for my shadow.
That's right. I met you that night for the first time.
That's when we first met, was the West Virginia game. And even being back here, I could hear it. It was electric out there. And I so badly wanted to go out there and be like, man, I just want to see what it's like in the crowd right now. Pete is really rocking. So that's definitely a great game. And the backyard brawl, I mean, with West Virginia football, the football game, the basketball games, it doesn't matter. That's always a really hot rivalry.
Yes, it absolutely is, and I love the spirit from both schools.
Oh yeah.
And you know, there have been some great battles on the hardwood, on the gridiron over the years, and never disappoints.
Never disappoints. I want to kind of go back in time for a second. Where exactly did this love for, I guess, play-by-play or broadcasting begin? Because earlier you were saying that you've always wanted to be a play-by-play announcer. Going back in time to maybe either your childhood, your high school days, or maybe even your young adult days, where did this love begin?
Well, it's probably a cliche answer that I think a lot of younger broadcasters and older broadcasters all have, but for a lot of us, it starts with just playing games by ourselves in the backyard, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, how many of us, when we were growing up, we played a wiffle ball game or played basketball in the driveway, or we're throwing the football to ourselves and announcing it as you go. Yep, Austin.
That's me.
Yep. So I think a lot of us have done that, and I know I was growing up in my driveway or in my basement, pretending I was in the Big East Championship game at Madison Square Garden and announcing it. And, it's interesting. I played so much basketball growing up and announced it to myself. And people would sometimes throw around that, what is it, the 10,000 hours theory, whatever it is. If you do something 10,000 hours, you'll eventually be a master at it or whatever that is. But for a while, I was like, oh, maybe that'll apply to me at basketball. But then I was like, maybe I'd have a better shot at doing it if I did 10,000 hours worth of announcing. I could get really good at it. So still working on that. But I think that's probably where it started was, just watching college basketball all the time growing up. And other sports too. Pirates, obviously here in Pittsburgh. Pitt football as well. Steelers, NFL. NBA I was big into as a kid, so a little bit of everything. And if you watch enough and
what was your favorite NBA team?
NBA team, so growing up it was always whatever team Shaq was on.
Okay.
But then the problem became Shaq was the guy that was switching teams all the time. I think people make that joke about Shaq, right, that you could make a rainbow out of the uniforms that he's worn throughout his career. And so then he retired. And it kind of just naturally became the Cavaliers after that.
That's fair.
2 hours from Pittsburgh. Obviously, Pittsburgh doesn't have an NBA team. And I usually get to 1 or 2 Cavs games a year. And so they kind of became my favorite team after Shaq retired.
That's a fair one. I mean, they're on a pretty hot run this year as well, so it's definitely a good team to be a fan of so far this year. I thought that was pretty cool because Pittsburgh doesn't have an NBA team, so you always see either Cavalier fans, Sixers fans, you get a couple of Knicks and Lakers stragglers here and there, but that's a pretty cool team. So you went from being, I guess, wanting to be a play-by-play guy when you were younger, wanting to do announcing. Let's now fast forward to going into college. What made you choose Pitt over every other school?
Yeah, well, I think part of it was definitely my love for Pitt sports teams that I've had my entire life. My father actually worked in the athletic department at the University of Pittsburgh when I was born. So my parents, and my birthday's in August, right before football season. So my parents always tell me, you actually attended your first Pitt sporting event when you were less than a month old.
That's cool.
I was born August 20th, 1997, and I think Pitt had a game a week after that, and I was there as a 1-week-old baby. So that was a big part of it. I definitely considered Syracuse heavily as well for all the reasons that people in this industry consider Syracuse one of the best programs in the country, if not the best. But at the end of the day, Pitt feels like home to me. It always has, and that was a huge factor in my decision, and couldn't have been happier about it.
Absolutely, and I could definitely tell that you were very passionate about Pitt. I mean, it pretty much, you've been here your entire career, you do all this different stuff here. What's some advice you would give to an up-and-coming broadcaster, an up-and-coming producer, or someone getting in the video production field, just someone getting into a live broadcasting field?
I think I have 2 good ones that I'll give you, Austin, and I'll start with don't immediately dismiss an opportunity because it doesn't feel like the right thing for you. When I first got started here at Pitt in the athletic department and working on Pitt's, at that time it was before ACC Network even existed, so a lot of these were just going on ESPN3, and that was it. But a lot of my counterparts at the time who also wanted to be announcers kind of started trying it out as well, but there were also people that dismissed it because they said, I just want to be on air, I don't want to put in the work wrapping cables or being a timeout coordinator or doing graphics or audio or whatever. I just want to announce. And while that was probably true for me as well, I just wanted to announce. Because I gave it a chance, it led me to where I am now. I wouldn't have the position I'm in now if I had not also taken the time to learn everything behind the scenes. And not only did I learn it, but I learned to enjoy it too. So that's one, is just don't dismiss an opportunity if you think it could help get you to where you want to be. I think very few people end up with their dream job right out of school, unless maybe you're Noah Eagle. He seems to have maybe done that, but most of the time that's not the case for people, and it takes time and steps to get to where you want to go. So that would be one, and then second one kind of goes hand in hand, but just find a way to manage your time where you're still doing the things you love doing, but recognize that if you want to succeed in this business, it does also involve maybe missing out on watching games with your friends, being in the student section with your friends. And that was one thing that was tough for me at first. I think when I got into this in college is when a lot of my friends from my floor, roommates in school, would say, "Hey, what time we heading up the hill for the game tonight at the P?" And I would have to say, "Sorry guys, I'll be working." And it is tough at first because you wonder, is this worth my time? Is this going to help me get to where I want to go, or am I just missing out on memories with my friends? But I think find a way to balance that where you're still making sure to set aside time for those moments with your friends. Because, right, you only do college once, and it is valuable experiences, but you also want to make sure that you're setting aside time to work on your future and your career. And it can be a tough thing to do, but if you're able to master that balance correctly, it can get those memories with your friends and also set you on the right track.
No, absolutely. And something Bill Hillgrove and Rob King actually added on, that's great to your point as well, is that you're going to have to miss those holidays. You're going to have to miss those birthdays. And as unfortunate as it is, to get into that career and to get to the promised land and where you want to be, you have to make those sacrifices. And as someone who's driven to do that, I'm very much okay with doing that stuff just to get to that next career. And I just hope so many people out there that want to do something like this understands the true value in that you have to give that kind of stuff up to get there.
Yeah, and I think, Austin, there's not even a right or wrong answer necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
It just comes down to what do you value as a person, and everyone's different. So I'm not going to sit here and shame somebody for saying, I can't work, that's Christmas Day. I totally get it.
Yeah.
Most of us love celebrating Christmas with our families or whatever holiday it may be. So I'm not going to sit here and say, how dare they not be tough enough to work on Christmas.
How dare you choose Santa over us?
Yeah, right. But some people who are willing to do that, it can help get you ahead. Right. So it just depends on what you value and what's important, and being careful about finding the right balance in all those things.
Absolutely. What would you say is one goal that you're going to set for yourself this year professionally, and one goal you're going to set for yourself professionally in the next 5 years?
Wow, that's a tough question. I think I would say this year, I think I just try to open up a new door each year. And if I look back at kind of the past few years, I think I've done that in different ways. So, maybe one year it was announcing play-by-play for Pitt men's basketball, and that was a big milestone. And then a year later, I started producing Pitt men's basketball for ACCN and ESPN. And then this past year, like you mentioned earlier, I started doing sideline in-game hosting at Acrisure Stadium for Pitt football. And so those are all kind of little things, I think, that indicate ways I've grown throughout my career. I think for anyone in this business, you never want to get too comfortable, right? You never want to feel like your career is stagnating in any way. So I don't know what exactly that looks like within the next year, but yes, I would like to hopefully add some kind of new opportunity to my resume and my experience that shows that I've grown in some ways. I don't like to just get comfortable doing the same thing year after year. I like to add new opportunities and experiences. So maybe that would be one for this next upcoming year. And then I think within the next 5-year window, I don't know. It's a tough one. And like I told you before, I really enjoy elements of both producing and doing play-by-play, especially for college basketball. So I guess maybe a goal that doesn't completely answer your question, but within the next 5 years, maybe to have a bigger role on college basketball games specifically, whether it is announcing or producing, would be really neat. But who knows? 5 years, it feels like a long time away, but it's going to go quick.
It does. Only time will tell. Only time will tell. Let's have some fun and talk some sports for a second. So Pitt basketball, not exactly the season everybody was expecting. What exactly happened to them this year?
Well, it's the question I think everybody's trying to figure out the answer to, Austin. And I think there are a lot of different things you could point to. But the one I've been going back to lately is just I think people maybe underestimated just how important Blake Hinson was to this team. Obviously, Bub Carrington is a massive loss as well. And we credited Jeff Capel in the program, and we had optimism at the start of the year because they did a good job kind of filling those spots a little bit. Well, the problem is one of the main guys that was filling those spots was Damian Dunn, who's missed about half the season, maybe more at this point. So that makes it really tough to win when you lose a guy as important as Blake Hinson and Carrington, and then you are forced to replace them. But Damian Dunn, your big get in the portal, who, by the way, people forget, early in the season, he was averaging close to 20 points a game. He was fantastic in the early portion, and then you lose him, makes it really, really difficult. So I think that's a big one. Just replacing those guys proved to be harder than I think a lot of people thought, and especially when you deal with the injuries that Pitt has dealt with. Obviously, Pitt's two stars have been Jalen Lowe and Ishmael Leggett. And for Leggett, sixth man of the year last year in the ACC, had a great season. But then all of a sudden you're asking him to be the star for this team and be the leading scorer alongside Lowe. And that can be tough. You know, he has done really well at times throughout this year. But Blake Hinson really was a one-of-a-kind type of player, a better shooter than Ishmael Leggett as well. And so I think you've missed Hinson's three-point shooting. Zach Austin has stepped up and been a really good three-point shooter, and he's an outstanding 3-and-D guy. But Jalen Lowe hasn't gotten his three-point stroke going, and so I think maybe you just expected, it to be easier to fill Hinson and Carrington's spots, and it just hasn't been. So it's been a tough season, but the one thing I'll tell you, Austin, is that in college basketball, in this era, you can flip it from one year to the next with ease. And that doesn't always mean getting a new coach. If you look at Missouri from last year to this year, Missouri was dead last in the SEC last year. I don't believe they won an SEC game. This year, they're top 20 in the country. They're a lock for the NCAA tournament with the same coach in Dennis Gates. And even you can point to Pitt from the end of the 2022 season into the next one. Jeff Capel scored on a number of different transfers, totally rebuilt the roster, and they went from a team that was in the bottom of the ACC to a team that was top 5 in the ACC and won 2 NCAA tournament games. So it really can happen in one off season. And so even though this year hasn't gone the way Pitt fans want it to, there are plenty of reasons to be optimistic, because that year Capel brought in Blake Hinson, had Jamarius Burton, Nike Sabandi, Nelly Cummings, Greg Elliott, and those guys were outstanding. And we'll see what Jeff Capel and his staff do this offseason, but we have to consider that that's very possible that he brings in guys of that caliber once again.
No, absolutely. And you took the words right out of my mouth. I was just about to ask you what your opinion was on Jeff Capel, and I 100% agree with you. A lot of people are already calling for his job, and I feel like that's a thing we do here in Pittsburgh, unfortunately. We expect success now, and if we don't get it now, we pretty much want your head on a swivel, get out of town. I don't believe we should do that, though, with Jeff Capel, though, because you're talking about a guy who brought in success to a team that has not seen it in, almost a decade, bottom of the ACC, got the 2 tournament wins. So, I mean, I'm perfectly okay with rolling with him for another year or two, see what we can produce, see what we can get, see what we can go for in the portal. I think he's done great things for Pitt.
Yeah, and another thing that's interesting, I think you make great points, Austin, but another thing about this era specifically is you're seeing a lot of athletic directors juggle the question of, do we spend money to pay a coach to go away, pay their buyout, or should we keep that coach around if we have faith in them and use this money instead to support the coach and build that roster, right? Because now you have NIL, revenue sharing is coming very quickly, and so we have this money, should we pay it to make them go away, or should we just give him that money to build a roster? And so that, I think, is going to be a factor for a lot of athletic directors' decisions coming up. Virginia Tech, I believe, recently announced that Mike Young is going to be coming back, and I think that was a factor in their decision, is if we believe in Mike Young, let's just use this money to have him build a roster. And so I think that's a great point. And Jeff Capel consistently has mentioned that he didn't know quite how bad the program was when he got here. Now, I know Pitt fans will never forget just how bad it was. The 2 years under Kevin Stallings are oftentimes an era that Pitt fans would like to just block out of their memory and pretend like it didn't exist, and for good reason. But I think fans need to remember that was a team that had not won an ACC game that season. And while it took Coach Capel about 5 years to get them back to the tournament and make them relevant and competitive again, he did do that. And so I absolutely agree with you. I think, see what he can build in the portal this offseason. He's shown that he's a great recruiter. He sent a guy to the lottery last year, right? So that's great for the program. And, you're going to have down years. A lot of programs do. And so I'll be interested to see what the roster looks like next year. And I'm excited for that.
Absolutely. Same here. Same here. Now let's talk about Pitt football for a second. 7-0, historic start. Then they end up losing their last 6 games, one of them being to Toledo in the bowl game. What's your opinion on, the Pitt football team from this past season?
Well, I hate to keep pointing to injuries, but I think that's a huge factor as well. Eli Holstein had an outstanding start to the year in just his redshirt freshman season. And so when you start to have him coming in and out of the lineup, becomes really, really difficult. And so I think the game at SMU obviously was not pretty. Pitt got blown out, and that was kind of the tip of the iceberg. They ended up not winning again the rest of the year. But if you have a consistent Eli Holstein, I think fans love his mentality. He seems to kind of embody Pittsburgh, only he's even been here for just a year. He seems to really be embracing that Pittsburgh type of grit and culture that the city has. So I think he's going to have an excellent career here. Desmond Reed obviously was an outstanding pickup as well. And so there are plenty of different bright spots on the offense and on the defense as well. Obviously, things didn't go the way fans wanted to over the last 6 games of the season, but you have to credit Pat Narduzzi. I think the stat that he always points to is over the last however many years, Clemson, Florida State, and Pitt are the only schools that have won ACC football championships. And that really makes you think. I mean, there are 2 schools that have had a dominant reign on this conference, and Pitt is the only school that has lumped themselves into that conversation. Clemson's obviously an outstanding program, but I think a lot of what I told you about basketball is true with football as well, where in this era with the transfer portal and NIL, you can flip a team. Pat Narduzzi really just did it. I mean, you had a team that won 3 games in the season the year before, and then he comes back and he starts 7-0 the following season. And again, didn't end how he wanted to. But you go from a team that was 3-9 and then start 7-0 the next year. So there's less continuation of a trend from one year to the next. And I'll be interested to see what Coach Narduzzi and his staff do this year. But a lot of reasons to be optimistic.
Lots of reasons to. Well, I guess what's your floor and what's your ceiling for Pitt football next year?
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could say, I think with Eli Holstein and Desmond Reed, I would be surprised to see that team not be bowl eligible, and you've got some key pieces returning defensively as well. Kyle Lewis, I should mention as well. He was outstanding for Pitt defensively last season, so I'll put the floor at 6 wins. I do not see this team missing out on a bowl. I think they have the pieces and the coaching staff to certainly do that. And then ceiling, they do have some tough games on the schedule next year, but
Notre Dame.
Notre Dame. I could see them winning 10 or 11 games. I really could, because they're young, they're talented, and they have a lot of really, really talented returning guys. So I'll put it somewhere between the 6 and 10 range there for Pitt.
Absolutely. Yeah, I feel like the thing that caught Pitt off guard a lot last year was the ACC schedule right in a row, because that dominant 7-0 start they had, they only faced a few ACC schools. Then their last 5 regular season games were all against ACC opponents. I feel like the ACC competition caught up to them just at the tail end of that season. And then going into that Toledo game as well, that's when they lost that one. So I feel like they just kind of overestimated, I guess, their opponents just a little bit. But it was still a pretty strong showing from Holstein last year.
Absolutely.
I was very impressed.
Yeah, I mean, again, maybe didn't end the way we wanted to, but he wasn't fully healthy. And through the first 7 weeks of the season, we're talking about a guy that was on the fringe of the Heisman conversation.
Yeah.
I mean, he was that good. Pitt was being talked about as a potential college football playoff team. And then injuries, in a lot of ways, derailed the last 5 or 6 weeks of the year. So I think going into this next season, and I should also point out, I think it helps a lot that Cade Bell now has a year under his belt. I think after 7 weeks, people were scared that we were going to lose Cade Bell and have him be poached by another team after all he had achieved through 7 weeks. Pitt had one of the best offenses in the country. So kind of one of those silver linings to the downward trend at the end of the season is Cade Bell didn't receive quite as much attention maybe as he would have from other schools. So I think him having a year under his belt at the ACC level is going to be huge because he displayed a number of different exciting elements about his offense in his first season. He's had an off season now to reflect on what maybe went wrong over the last 6 weeks, and I think with him running the offense, Randy Bates has always kind of done an excellent job on the defensive side, and trust in Coach Narduzzi that they'll have a lot of reasons to be optimistic in the fall.
Absolutely. I'm most certainly excited for the upcoming football season. It's always good whenever college football's back in town.
Yes, it is.
It's always good. I'm going to ask you probably the most important question that you have ever been asked. This is the most important question that's ever been asked on Two Jagoffs, and I want to get your honest opinion on it. What is your go-to favorite Pittsburgh restaurant?
Oh, wow. That's a tough one.
It's a tough one.
That's a really tough one.
I don't mean to put you on the spot.
Jeez, wow, that's difficult. I love Italian food, so I think it's got to be something Italian. I often go back to Girasoli in Shadyside. That's a great one. Narcissi Winery, for anyone who's been there, fantastic Italian food, great atmosphere. You sit outside at Narcissi on a nice summer or fall day. It's really, really good vibe. So I'll give you those two, and been to D'Anoia's in the Strip District as well.
Okay.
So those are maybe my Italian Pittsburgh food big three right there.
Those are some good ones. Those are some really good ones. All right, now to end off today's episode of Two Jagoffs, we usually do like a game show every Sunday where we kind of just like have some laid back fun. We'll do a weekly episode every Thursday where we talk about like all the stuff going on in the sports world. Sometimes we'll have debates. We'll bring on guests. And then on Sunday, we mix things up and we just kind of have some fun. So, unfortunately, the other Jagoff, Lucas Coons, couldn't be here today. So, on behalf of him, he wanted me to ask you one of our random game show questions that we have. And it's a this or that question. So, it's pretty much like a would you rather.
Sounds good. Let's do it.
And he has two of them prepared for you. This is my first time actually looking at them. So, this is from Lucas, the second Jagoff. His first question to you is, are you the type of person to put the cereal in the bowl first or milk in the bowl first?
I think there's only one right answer to this question, right? I mean, you have to put the cereal in first. That's the only correct way to do it. So I hope nobody else has answered that one differently.
No. You're actually the first person we asked that to, and I feel like it's a crime if you do it the other way.
I completely agree.
You have to put the cereal in first. And this is actually a good one as well. Kenny Pickett or Dan Marino, who did more for the University of Pitt?
Oh my gosh.
That's a good one, actually.
That's a really good one. It's very tough to decide between the two of them.
Props to you, Lucas. I didn't expect that.
That's a hard question. I think both were obviously very important in different ways and at different points in their respective careers and kind of where the state of Pitt football was at. So to speak to Pickett, because he's more recent, obviously I was not alive when Dan Marino played at Pitt, but with Pickett, you're talking about a program that kind of had been stuck in, I don't want to say mediocrity, but they couldn't quite break through to conference championship level, playoff conversation level. And then in his last season, he just shatters all of that. He sets records. He gets the team to an ACC title. Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl was really, really neat, especially for someone like me who grew up in an era where I think before the Peach Bowl, the last big-time bowl game Pitt had been to was the Fiesta Bowl when I was maybe 6 or 7 years old. And so for Kenny Pickett to be the quarterback that changed all of that was really, really incredible. But that being said, I've heard the argument where Kenny really only had one great year at Pitt. He had some good years at Pitt, but his great year was his last year. Dan Marino, I think, how he did it at an elite level throughout his Pitt career, maybe would get the slight edge, but certainly the timing of when Kenny Pickett brought Pitt an ACC title was unforgettable for Pitt football fans as well.
No, I 100% agree with you on that. Jason, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you here on Two Jagoffs today. Do you have any final words or anything you would like to leave the viewers of Two Jagoffs?
Austin, thank you so much for having me, and my final words are do not expand the NCAA tournament.
Those are the best final words you could have ended off with. Well, thank you again, Jason, so much for coming on, and thank you all so much for tuning into Two Jagoffs. Until next time, we'll see you in the next one. Peace.